If you've missed any of the past two messages, you can find them posted on our Facebook page. We've been traveling through this book called As We Forgive. Some really unique, incredible examples of people struggling to forgive and learning what mercy means. At 13, Claude was a thoughtful young man, his mind always wandering as he tended his family's herds of cattle up and down the rolling hills of Rwanda. His childhood ended one night as somebody lobbed a grenade while they were sleeping into his family's hut. His mother died in the blast. His older sister was raped and then killed. He grabbed his younger sister and fled into the woods. His father escaped too, went to try and set up resistance, but was caught and then killed by being tied behind a car and dragged until he was dead. Claude's familiarity with the hidden places in the woods helped them for the next few months as he and his younger sister moved during the night, hiding during the day, scavenging roots and bits of food that he could steal without them being noticed. The author of the book writes that the people chasing him were faces that he knew well. There was Mikkel, who lived down the road. He had thrown the grenade. Kenyenzi, also a man he'd known all his life, tracked him in the night, shouting his name. Edison, someone Claude passed every day on his way to graze the cattle, had dragged off his sister. Even after the fighting stopped, Claude couldn't feel at home anywhere. He spent 3 years wandering from place to place, unable to deal with the trauma of the memories that he carried with him. He finally returned to school, but at this point he was hopelessly behind. Without parents, without support system, he faced an uncertain future and a life of struggle. And he traced it all back to what had happened and what had been done to him. He repeated to himself daily a list of names. The people who had wronged him, whose faces he knew and had been burned in his memory. He wanted revenge. Now, maybe your life hasn't been like Claude's. But maybe you today could very quickly come up with a list of names of people who have wronged you. Sometimes in very significant ways. And we play the game. If this hadn't happened to me, if that person hadn't done that to me, then my struggles today would be different. And it's hard because sometimes that is the truth. We go through life limping. And it's because of something that someone had done to us. When the hurt is ongoing, it is hard to forget and difficult to forgive. Especially when we see that person, if they've not expressed remorse for it, if they seem to be going through life fine. They seem unbothered by what keeps you up at night. Now let me tell you this morning, it is not wrong to cry out for justice to be done. If somebody goes into your house and they steal from you, you are not sinning by calling the cops. You are not angering God if you expect the courts to convict them to deliver justice. In fact, God promises to bring us justice. It is a comfort given to a persecuted church, 2 Thessalonians 1:6. He says, God is just. He will pay back trouble to those who trouble you, and give relief to you who are troubled, and to us as well. So we have this promise of God that we can look forward to. Now, God's justice takes two forms, and I preached about this almost 2 years ago. God's justice takes two forms. It is either the eternal separation of hell for people who have wronged us, or it is found in the cross of Jesus Christ. He promises justice to us. Here's where we get our problems, though. It is when we want to take the justice that belongs to God and take it into our own hands, and we want to give to other people what they've given to us. We want to do to people as we feel they deserve. Can you imagine if you actually set out to do this in every circumstance in life? If you woke up one morning and you said, you know what, I'm going to stop I'm going to give people what they actually deserve in every situation. Well, you'd cause some traffic jams because every time somebody drove slowly in front of you, you'd have to veer around them, get in front of them, and then drive even slower, right, to get them back. You might have a few shouting matches with people. If they interrupt you in conversation, you got to talk back right over them. In fact, you might even have to bite the dog back a few times. Now, we think that is perhaps humorous, and yet, how often do we do this ourselves or see other people do? Somebody wrongs you, and so then you go and you talk bad about them to other people. After all, they did that thing to you. They deserve it. It's one of the most basic human impulses to do to other people what has been done to us. I remember being fascinated as a kid, reading this article, National Geographic. These photographers were out in this super rare cave spider. And they're there photographing it, and the spider does what spiders may do. And it jumps up and it bites the one guy on the hand. And everybody begins yelling at him, "Don't kill it!" Now, he's not going to teach the spider a lesson. I mean, it's a spider. It's just doing what spiders do, and yet something bites him. You want to bite it back. But let me tell you, if you are refusing to forgive someone until you feel they deserve it, you are missing the entire point of forgiveness. Peter asked Jesus a question about forgiveness and grace in Matthew 18. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?" Now, in that culture, that was kind of a high watermark. Like, man, 7 times. Jesus answered, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times." Some translations say 7 times 70. Peter's question is basic. He says, "Jesus, is there a limit? A point at which somebody can wrong me, either repeatedly or by lobbing a grenade into my life? Is there a point, a limit that I can reach at which I say, no more, I'm going to give you what you deserve. I am not going to forgive you. I'm going to pursue justice with my own hands." And Jesus says, no. Now, he doesn't say, up to 77 times, and then we keep that tally with somebody, and, we do the math and we send them a letter. You are 2 sins away. So, have you noticed? Jesus tells a parable then to illustrate his point. Verse 23. "Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him." Now, the word translated as bags of gold is talent. It was kind of a loose form of measurement. It was a very large amount. In fact, a talent would be worth something like 20 years' wages in today's currency. That's 1 talent, and this guy owes 10,000 of those. Now, this actually happened last year. A guy in New Hampshire swiped a debit card at a gas station buying cigarettes and was mistakenly charged $23 quadrillion. Quadrillion is $1,000 trillion. And so it shows up on his statement. Of course, the bank tags on the $15 overdraft fee to make matters worse. And they eventually settled it with him. But can you imagine if that was actually the case? Somebody actually owed that amount of money. Like, we do the math and we figure out the entire national debt is really owed by one person. It's Mark. It's all Mark's fault. All of this national debt that we're concerned about, It's him! And we bring him in before the king or president or whoever. And what are you going to do, Mark? And so this guy is brought into the king in the parable. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. Now this is how the ancient world handled debt that could not be repaid. You would be sold as a slave. If you defaulted on a loan, you'd be sold as a slave until your labor could pay off the debt that you owed. You understand the implication for this guy and his family, of course. They're never in a million years going to perform enough work to pay off that debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. Be patient with me, he begged, and I will pay back everything. The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. Now, he's not letting him go because he believes that he will actually pay him back. In fact, he doesn't let him go and say, all right, I'm going to give you like 100 days. Come up with the money and pay this off. He doesn't release him on a payment plan. He just cancels the debt outright. Can you imagine if you had been standing there watching this all play out? You go from maybe rolling your eyes like, yeah, sure, he's going to pay him back. Maybe you're getting ready to grab the guy. You've got your black hood ready to put over his head, and he's just going to disappear. And then your jaw is hitting the floor as this massive amount of debt that you can't even fathom has been canceled, and the guy is released free of charge. Jesus continues. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. Pay back what you owe me, he demanded. Now we might give him a little bit of leniency. He's probably a little bit stressed after the day's events. And he goes out and he finds this other guy who owes him, this would be the equivalent of several $1,000s. And he grabs him and demands that he pay him back. Now he's not, of course, trying to raise money. His debt's been canceled completely. He's debt-free. But this other guy does owe him money. He does not deserve to have the debt canceled. Whatever agreement, he does owe him the money. He is within his rights to ask for repayment. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, be patient with me, and I will pay it back. But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the other guy, that man, thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. This is what you do when you refuse to forgive someone because you feel they do not deserve it. You might not throw them in an actual jail, but you keep them in that cell in your mind, perhaps imagining giving them what they deserve, or simply repeating the list of their offenses, the amount of their debt towards you, repeating it over and over and over in your mind. Of course, the irony is that you are the one who is jailing yourself by holding on to this. I've been there. I've been there, and it's hard. It's hard when they don't deserve it, if they've never acknowledged it to you. And it's a very real amount. Jesus continues, though, with the consequences of this man's behavior. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said. I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you? In his anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. Now, Jesus tells this story to illustrate, and everybody who hears this, and Peter listens, and he says, of course, how crazy and evil and stupid would that servant have to be after he's forgiven that massive amount to go around and be so stingy with another person. And he tells this parable, so in the moment of us judging that servant and saying he's getting what he deserves, that the tables are turned, and of course, Jesus is referring to us. We would say, well, how could this guy forget what happened just a few hours ago? How could he walk out of the palace, the largest debt ever in the country, forgiven free of charge, and then go and choke somebody else, and then we find we're really just pointing the fingers at ourselves? How can we forget the way that God has forgiven us, and then we go out and we choke other people for offenses that are so trivial in comparison to what God has forgiven us? Jesus makes it very clear to sum everything up. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. And that's a lot of that from the heart part. We've all been there as kids, right? Your parents. I remember one of my neighbors, they made me, real mad. And I chased him around the yard with a baseball bat. And I tagged him once, actually, a little bit, clipped him. Maybe go over and apologize. And, you can say the words of apology or forgiveness. But let me tell you, as I was saying in that case, I'm sorry, I was wishing I'd gotten more connection. And we've done the same with other people. Somebody has wronged us in some way, and we say, it's all right. We don't mean that. We say to the face, oh, don't worry about it. And then we worry about it, and we're angry with them over it. And he says, God's expectation for us because of his forgiveness to us is that we would forgive others from the heart in the same way that God has forgiven us. And again, forgiveness, just to be clear, does not look like demanding that if somebody owes you money, forgiveness is not waiting until they pay you back and, oh, now I forgive you. If I get one of those calls about the government's student debt forgiveness program, and here's the program, you pay us back what you owe us. That's not a forgiveness program. All right, and so you do not get to hold over another person things that they must do to pay you back before you will forgive them. That is not how God forgave you. So which account will you focus on? What you feel is owed to you or what has been forgiven you? If you refuse to forgive people, if you go through life saying, I'm not going to give anyone what they do not deserve, Jesus says that when you stand before God, he will give you what you deserve. Matthew 6, he says pretty much the same thing. For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. The only way to right standing with God is for him to forgive you in a way that you do not deserve. The only way that we will see peace in our world and in our lives is if we are people who treat others in a way that they do not and will not ever deserve. Famous play Les Miserables, in one of the opening scenes, the main character has just spent more than a decade in jail for stealing bread to feed somebody who is starving. And he is a bitter man as he exits. And he struggles, though, being now a convicted criminal, and he is taken in by a friendly priest, and the priest brings him into his house. and he feeds him and he clothes him. And he pays him back by stealing his silver and escaping in the early morning. He is caught, though, and he is brought back to the priest with the silver. And the priest, seeing him in a situation, knowing what this means for him, says, well, of course he has the silver. I gave it to him. And then he scolds the guy and says, I can't believe you left without taking the candlesticks, which are more valuable than what he'd taken. You should have taken the candlesticks too. Here, take the candlesticks with you. Go with my blessing. And the rest of this play follows how that one act of radical forgiveness and mercy, he deserved justice. He received mercy instead, and it shattered his world. And it changed his heart. The second point of the parable is not just that if we refuse to forgive others, God will give us what we deserve, but a reminder of the impact that God's mercy should have on our life. I bet any one of us, if somebody just showed up in your life and said, I'm paying the sum total of your mortgage for you. Or, hey, let's just say all debt that you have, wouldn't you? I mean, that would change your life. How can the gospel have less of an impact on us than that? That every sin I've ever done and will ever do, every evil thought and evil deed I've done against other people, no matter what I have deserved from that, no matter how great the sum, and let me tell you, I feel like I had racked up a lot more than 10,000 bags of gold. That was forgiven me in an instant? Are you kidding me? It took me months to come to grips with the fact that this could possibly be true in my life. And when we let that sink in, it should change everything. The Lord's Prayer, we say, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. That's where the title of the book came from. Colossians 3:13. Again, this is over and over and over again in the Bible. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive as the Lord forgave you. God is so overwhelming in His mercy. It has been my particular prayer these past few weeks that God would make me a merciful person in the same way that He is. Because I'm not always. And I need to be. So Claude lived his life desiring revenge. In fact, most of us in this situation, if we can be honest, we might even just suggest as a solution to their overcrowded prisons with all of these people, who were lobbing grenades and hacking people to death with machetes, just kill them all. Wouldn't that be some of us, our form of justice? Maybe we would say, we'll do a budget-friendly solution. We'll just go into the jails with machetes. And we'll bring justice. Claude began to follow the trial of his father's killer, finding out that dragging his father to death was really the least of this guy's crimes. He even considered becoming a lawyer so that he could pursue justice through the court system and a measure of revenge. But the accounting of the horrible things that this man had done and the very slow pace of the proceedings left Claude wanting more. In fact, it led to him returning to his village and walking the familiar paths that he imagined himself countless times over the years returning, except this time he was the one who had a grenade. And he returned to his village, not even with a particular plan in mind, not even knowing how he would find these people. In fact, as he got off the bus and he hit his village, he'd given up hope of even finding the people who had wronged him. He just wanted to go to the first Hutu house that he could. And he wanted to unfurl all of his hurt and all of his anger and do to another family as had been done to him. And isn't that where revenge leads us? That is the end of the path when we refuse to forgive. We find ourselves doing to other people the same thing that had so warped and twisted us. This is why so many men who grow up in abusive households become abusers themselves. Maybe you have found yourself in the moment with your hand raised high, your mouth loaded with those cutting words against someone else that had traumatized you. He was only 17 at the time. Hurt people hurt people. And yet, somebody had warned them. And as he got nearer to the village, he was dismayed as women and children began running away from him. And he gave up on his plan. It was years before he could say that he was upset or that he was glad that his plan had failed. Some 7 years later, he finally graduated secondary school, and he got connected with the survivors group who found hope in God. His grades were not good enough to get him into college through a scholarship, and so this group of survivors actually teamed up and they paid for him to return to school. Claude learned the promise of the gospel, that we are not left orphans, though our father or mother be taken from us, that we are welcomed into God's family, and that he could be forgiven. It was his understanding of God's incredible grace toward him that allowed him to finally set it aside and let go of the hatred. Not even a month later, he was visiting a friend in a neighboring town. And he was walking through a crowd. Have you ever, in a crowd of people, seen a face that you recognize? And this happened to him. And his heart begins to race, and he gets closer, and he recognizes the man. This is Kenyenzi, who had hunted him many nights. And he gets closer, and the man is kneeling, retying a sack of rice onto his bicycle where it had fallen off. He is kneeling and in a vulnerable position, and his blood begins to boil. Here finally is that perfect chance for revenge. And yet, the gospel had changed him. Instead of striking out, he reached out and offered forgiveness to one of the people on his list. This is where the gospel shines. Back in January, the family members of the 9 people that were killed in that church by Dylan Roof, they confronted him as he waits to be executed. And there was a mix of people in their reaction. Some of them came and they yelled at him and they shouted at him and vented their anger. Others came to offer him their forgiveness. And I tell you, those two different groups of people now, justice will be done. He is going to die and he is going to face God. And justice will happen one way or another. But those who are left behind are in two very different paths. For those who vented their anger, I tell you that not even watching his execution will be enough to satisfy their desire for revenge. And those people who, by God's grace alone, were able to offer forgiveness, they, through struggle, will find peace. I want to ask you this morning, which group are you in? Do you have a list of names and accounts owed to you that you have held on to? Have you found yourself like Claude, so wounded and unable to get beyond the things that have been done to you that you're just wanting to unload on somebody, anybody? I encourage you to consider how great a love the Father has for you. That not counting your sins against you, He offers free and total forgiveness. That will overcome you. I encourage you to come and lay those debts before the altar this morning. Let's pray. God, what can we say in response to what you have done for us? Can we make any claim on deserving your mercy? Have we ever been able to repay you? God, there's not a one of us that can say, through our own hard work and determination, our own righteousness or goodness, that we have somehow been able to deserve the love and the mercy and the forgiveness that you've poured out into our lives. That you took our sins, you bore them on the cross. You paid our debt. And God, you call us to do the same to other people, and that is hard. We thank you that we don't have to worry about justice being done. That is in your hands. So God, I pray that we would become agents of mercy, treating other people in the way that they do not deserve, showing forgiveness as we have been forgiven. In Jesus' name.